Welcome back. I'm glad you're still with us. Time now for the Kickstarter, and budget planning in an election year is our topic for the day. I have with me guests in the studio. I'll be introducing them very shortly. But Uganda's Vision 2040 aims to achieve what's described as a transformed Ugandan society from peasant to a modern and a prosperous country within 30 years. The private sector can play a critical role in this realization of Vision 2040 because it generates 77% of formal jobs, contributes 80% of GDP, and funds 60% of all investment, and provides more than 80% of government domestic revenues. Employs approximately 2.5 million people and provides, as statistics indicate, 80% of government revenues. Those statistics and numbers do offer perspective to the kind of interventions that ought to be made in order to achieve the Vision 2040. Now, as we inch closer to 2026, 2025 becomes an anchor year because it has to define what happens in 2026. The amount of money, for example, that goes into electioneering here in Uganda over the last 10 years is staggering. And many people are saying, since we are positioning ourselves for yet again another general election, priorities might change or be dismissed, sometimes completely abandoned. Should that be the case, I have with me Dr. Gerard Werike, a board member at Uganda Youth Development Link, joining us for the conversation. Many thanks for making time, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, our viewers.
I'm also joined by Kenneth Asiimwe, an economist at CSBAG. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you made time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
First and foremost, I know the election year has a lot of people positioning themselves, and many analysts are putting together the projections and perspectives of how things will work out, where the money will go. But let me first engage you on something that is happening across the globe, and that might have a very direct implication on what happens during this particular period. We saw on Monday the swearing in of the new president of the United States, and some of the executive orders that have already gone out include cutting of aid to countries that have been receiving this particular aid. This will determine the amount of money that goes into the election, because politicians, especially those that have some leaning to government, will have to understand that there isn't much from where they have to get, and maybe common sense will prevail. I hope so. But what's your take on the New World Order? Let me begin with Doctor.
Of course, we cannot pretend that we didn't know what was coming, because we have observed a whole 2 years of campaigns in the United States, for instance, and then the discussion there whether to withdraw from the globe and focus on America first. And as you know, the US pumps a lot of money in global health institutions. For instance, I was looking at data from the WHO. It's a whooping, you know, if you compare with the second country, that is China, in terms of contribution, it more than doubles what China contributes. And also, if you look at the programs, for instance, climate change, building resilient communities in agriculture, we have been seeing the US, through USAID, putting a lot of money in that. So if you look at the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement, it's going to directly affect that funding, as the US focuses on drilling oil and restarting the coal mines and so forth. So I believe that not only the NGOs are going to suffer, but also government institutions like Office of the Prime Minister, Prime Minister of Water, where I'm seeing programs by the UN and others to preserve, for instance, the wetlands and so forth. So I think as we see that, it's important that as a country, we begin rethinking. If probably our budget was going to overshoot, we need to be realistic. And then we see, if we are going to put this figure in the budget, then where is it going to come from? Because look at the previous budgets. You project that domestically we are going to raise probably 31 trillion from the taxes, domestic revenue, but at the end of the day you collect 27 or 29. You look at the domestic revenue as percentage, so the tax as a percentage of GDP, it is very, very low. I think it's still below 13%. Okay. So we need to prioritize correctly, re-strategize, and then we see how we can we can adapt to the new context.
Okay, talking about adapting to the new context of the global order, economists must be prancing up and down the bookshelves and trying to understand how things are going to turn out. I know we already have an idea how it's going to move, but from your point of view, how is the new order looking like? What should we interest ourselves in light of Trump's re-emergence on the international stage?
Thank you. To begin with, is to re-emphasize the fact that what happened on Monday, or the pronouncements that were made on Monday, were not a surprise. It is what we expected. That is something that we need to have in mind. And it's not the first time that Trump has become the president of America, and we know what he has done in the past. And so for me, this actually, as we strategize and so on, I think there are lessons to learn. One, over-reliance on external financing for our key sectors. Look at agro-industrialization, for example. Look at sustainable energy development. Look at climate change. When you look at the budgets, including the incoming year's budget, the 2025-26, you find that over 85% of that budget has been projected to be financed externally. And now here, the terrain, the economic terrain is now changing. So what we need to look at now, at the moment, is to expect actually even more to come. You know, during this Trump's term, we expect to receive more sort of shocks in terms of support from the United States. And now because of that expectation, this one comes back to our preparedness. How prepared are we to be in charge, to be sovereign in terms of controlling and supporting our economy and economic growth? To me, this speaks to revenue mobilization strategy, our domestic revenue mobilization strategy. I know it has not, it's supposed to end, it's only designed in 2019 and it's supposed to end in 2025. And I think we have not done much. But what I believe is that it's what we need to re-emphasize and look at the gaps. For example, CSBAG has already identified some of the gaps within revenue mobilization. And one of it is on the money that we forego in tax exemptions vis-a-vis the productivity of the tax exemptions. We have seen investors getting exemptions, but what they deliver, they don't deliver on the terms and conditions agreed on for them to qualify for the exemptions. We did an analysis and discovered that over about 10 years, we have foregone revenue worth 2.97 trillion in just incentives. That is one area as we strategize going forward. Secondly, I'm just giving solutions now. What I think we needed to do, I believe that we needed to reduce on that mindset of getting support and now look backwards on our own economy and how we can move forward. Secondly, we have a huge potential in our informal sector. And now what we need to do is to find mechanisms of formalizing our informal sector so that we bring it into the part of paying taxes. That is another area that we need to look at critically. Another area of resource mobilization that we have identified as CSBAG is on URA. Signing MOUs with districts, local governments, especially the border districts, to support in collection of revenue so that it can give maybe commission to those districts, but this will help us to raise more revenue that is lost through most of these districts and so on, because URA can't be everywhere actually, but these districts are there. So for me, I think that's what I look at, a very critical strategy that can help us to build a self-reliant economy. And of course, the issue of privatization is very key, because we don't have enough resources to meet every other need. But where we prioritize, we have seen there is an area that we have identified, and also the government identified, it is tourism. Tourism is the export that never leaves the country. And what is interesting about this tourism is that the World Bank did a study and found that it has the higher multiplier effect, meaning that it's about to 2.61. So meaning that for every 1 shilling you invest in tourism, it will bring returns that are more than double that shilling. So now we are saying that this tourism will help us to bring in foreign exchange. And I think that is the most important thing that we look at. We already have debts that we have to pay. And if we're not receiving more money in foreign currency, it means this side we are crippled because we have to pay back in that foreign currency. And what can save us is, one of the key sectors that can save us is tourism. So let us tighten our belts.
No doubt about that. Tightening our belts is a very, very timely phrase to employ in this particular situation. Dr. Werike, government, as I speak right now, is already rolling out much of what the budget for the financial year 2024-2025 is. And if you look, for example, at the Daily Monitor today, how 16 trillion Uganda shillings for Q3 has been shared out. It's the usual story, and you can be taken aback by seeing 348.3 billion Uganda shillings going to the Ministry of Defense, and that is in comparison to, for example, less than 50 billion to the health sector, institutions like Mulago, Cancer Institute, Health, and the Heart Institute. But what we're looking at here is, in light of what is going to happen over the next few months, is there an assurance that money that has been assigned for particular sectors that are critical will be kept there? Do you, for example, within your good offices at the Uganda Youth Development Link, see this happening as it ought to, or we must, like Mr. Asiimwe says, prepare ourselves for shocks when it comes to the budget process?
Now, if you have been a critical observer of our budgeting and then budget performance in Uganda, you can agree with me that many times there is budget indiscipline. That we don't stick to what we plan to do, and then we create emergencies at the end of the day, and then you see so many supplementary expenditures, even sometimes surpassing the limit that is allowable within the law. So I don't see this stopping, because it usually happens more especially during the election year. If you look at the analysis of the budget, for instance, on classified expenditure for security, you'll find duplication in various budget lines under President's Office, State House, Ministry of Defense, Security. But at the end of the day, defense, this budget is spent by the same people. And probably, if we are not allowed to openly, check these budgets, how they are utilized, but at least there should be an internal mechanism. Declassification, a certain level of declassification, that we are able to know if there is wastage or not. Because in terms of crisis, as I call it, sometimes the budget can be abused by the people. And then we also have this where we project, we're going to give this, but at the end of the day, we don't collect enough as projected. So you find that some sectors remain with unfunded priorities, but they were placed in the budget. If you look at the other budget, 2003, 2004, I think out of about 50-something trillion, we released only 43 trillion. So some of these allocations we see in the newspaper could be the figures projecting, but we may not achieve the objective because we may not even raise enough revenue to go into those sectors. And therefore, we find ourselves in the funding gap. Therefore, I just think we need to be honest to ourselves, look at the priorities, what is more important, what is not important, we can push it aside, or we can proportionately try to distribute and be realistic, instead of projecting to achieve more, but yet we know we're going to achieve very little. That is right.
Okay, Mr. Asiimwe, when I listen to the perspective shared by Dr. Wereke, I see what is no doubt a very hard job for most of the technocrats that we do have, because of the political interference that comes in, especially when making disbursements and choices for what vote goes to which particular sector. The permanent secretary himself has spoken about the fact that political influence is hindering, and although he claims that he has made headway in staving off many politicians who want to dip their fingers into the coffers at any one point in time or influence what particular vote goes where, there is still that fact that it is not something that is going to get over with as soon as possible within this election year. So that means we cannot avoid the kind of tumult that will occur. There is bound to be, first and foremost, inflation. What I know right now, if the money begins to be rolled out, campaigns, shirts, banners, whatever, there's going to be so much money that would flip their own targets that they have set, which is, I just want to find out here, 3.3% in December, headline inflation 2024, from 2.9 in November. Do you see inflation staying within check?
Okay.
I'm sorry, the inflation aspect came in a little earlier, or rather late, but the whole issue was about the fact that can we survive politicians?
Okay, we may not. I remember the year when we had the highest political, I may call it, political inflation. It was after the 2011 elections. So still it's not new. We expect that to happen. But for me, I think my biggest worry as an economist is an issue of seigniorage, printing of money. That one can increase inflation within no minute. Because if we have this small resource envelope and the government is pushed against the world due to the pressures and so on, they may resort to printing of money. And now when they print that money, it not being backed up by productivity or the thriving economy or economic activities, it may see inflation rise up. And specifically to speak to this, we may not survive see rising inflation because our politics is highly commercialized. Money is a very key tool in our politics here. And therefore, because of that, it is very important for us to predict that there is a likelihood that inflation will rise because money will move around. You just wait for about 4 or 5 months from now, you will see.
And the implication of that, how are we, do we have the mechanism as an economy to safeguard against the adverse effects, for example?
Okay, for me, let me first mention this. Yeah, of course, you know, for us, usually in economics, when you look at the central bank, they usually do what we call quantitative easing, or they do inflation targeting. Now, for us as the country, we use inflation targeting, whereby we target our inflation to remain within the limit of 5%. So it means we usually have mechanisms to do that, but what affects us from not meeting that target? Because before we have seen our inflation, even like 2022, 2023, has even been in a double-digit figure. What causes that? Let me stress it out clearly, other than those other shocks we express, but this time around for politics. We may have control over the decisions we make, but we cannot have control over the consequences. That's what we must know. That we may have control over those decisions, but we may not have control over the consequences. So once we allow money to move around the economy, it means we may not have the capacity, or the mechanisms in place may not be sufficient enough to keep inflation within the expected range or limit. Yes, that's what I can say.
Okay. Has the budget process engulfed you already as the Youth Development Link? Any consultations underway? And if there is, what is your prong? What have you sought to achieve or to share so that government can craft the budget that is friendly within this election year to youth?
Yeah, of course, as AYDL, we focus on young people.
That's right. And
as you see the statistics from you, boss, you know children alone below 17 years are 50.6% of the population. Numbers, the elders are only 6%. That's why we focus on that. So there are, of course, interventions like PDM, where government is preserving some percentage for the young people, and then also interview, but they are not enough. So we believe that we need to engage the government more, because we believe that when we work with the government together, we achieve more. And so that engagement is taking place. But the other weakness that we have is that most of our funding is usually foreign funding for most NGOs here. And we are not exclusive. Even others are also going through the same. So we are even worried that this global change in things is going to affect us. But as a board, we are looking at sustainability. That can we internally engage with the local stakeholders, but also we go into social entrepreneurship to see that as an organization to support the young people, we do not only depend on foreign funding, but we are also able to generate our own income. That's right. Like through partnership with NFA and forestry. We started that a number of years ago, and we believe moving forward is going to help us. But as it is, especially on youth and elections, for instance, I looked at the Electoral Commission budget. We don't have money there for civic sort of voter education. So meaning that we might take a large population of youth into elections, but they go and participate negatively because they are not sensitized. There are issues of electoral violence. So if this voter education and also civic education is not funded, and actually it's not funded, then we have a gap. We may not harvest, the youth may not engage effectively in making constructive decisions. So it's something we are really engaging with government.
Okay. Let me stay with you on this. Apart from the general information about elections and the idea that you have to be set, registered, verified, just like the process is currently ongoing, how targeted should this particular initiative that requires or needs to have the youth on board in order to make the best possible decisions when deciding who to vote for in 2026, how should these designs appear? What do you have in mind? Do you have a blueprint that you have created, for example, for the Electoral Commission, if it engaged your organization on youth engagement?
Yeah, of course, one of the areas we have found out, which we can effectively use, is the digital platforms.
Digital platforms, yeah.
That internet penetration has increased. And so the young people are active there on Twitter, on Facebook, and so forth. So, but also, if you are engaging them there, which message are you delivering
to them?
Maybe I want to say that 2 years ago, with the support from USAID, and then about 30 organizations in Uganda under the Youth Coalition for Electoral Democracy in Uganda, we came together to find out which areas of reform we need for the youth to effectively participate. One of them was on issues of representation. The youth are not happy with the youth MPs who are elected through the current electoral college system, because they say it is manipulative, prone to bribery, and very few youth gather. And so we have pushed for such reforms, but unfortunately, if you look at what we have been engaged in Parliament, the issue of reforms has not been prioritized by the Parliament and the government. We talked of things to do with the cutoff for youth, that we extract the voters register of the youth from the NIRA data like over a year before the elections. So many youths who make 18 years are left out. And then we did a comparison with South Africa and Kenya. We discovered that in Kenya the cutoff is 6 months. And then South Africa, it is even just 90 days. Because it is digitized, people can register continuously. But here, we recommended probably begin registering this for when they're even at the age of 16, but you only vote when you make 18. So they are not left out. By the way, they are left out in millions.
Yeah, very many.
Yes. We talked about how to work with the security organs and state institutions to diffuse the political tensions usually instigated by the young people. So we have mapped out the hotspots where we usually see the youth fight, the youth on drugs, the youth on, you know, they go and confront the security. So such who are always participating negatively, how can they be made to participate positively? It is something that we need to focus on, because the other which I'm really appealing to government, that let's prioritize civic education, so it's continuous. Because if you have an ignorant population, especially of the young people, then it will be, the implication will be seen in the quality of leaders that they elect and the decisions they take. So it's not something that is a privilege, but I believe it should be a right for the people of this country, especially the young people. I thank government that if you look at under the president's office, the initiatives like the patriotism clubs, but now the youth out of school are just moving there. These days, the youth who are kicking people on the street, 17 years, 18 years, high on drugs. So what programs do we have for those who are out of school?
Okay. That's a very good submission, no doubt. Kenneth Asiimwe, I have two questions for you right about now. The first one is when you are positing and doing all this research as an economist and trying to put together dynamics and trends and understanding what government ought to do, where it can intervene and how, I don't know whether it's a movement of young economists, for example, that will understand young people's issues. I don't know whether that conversation ever surfaces when you are discussing, because one thing I know is that in all spheres of life, the youth understand the youth more. A 70-year-old economist might not understand a 25-year-old. So I don't know whether you're very young, no doubt about that. And I believe, is there some sort of movement that you are running or part of that solely focuses on understanding youth and crafting economic policy and the dynamics that they play, they live under, in order to get the best possible solutions on that? Is there something happening you can share with us?
Okay. To reply to this, to be realistic, personally, I'm not part of any movement, but as CSBAG, we have done some work.
Maybe movement is a very political one. I should have said initiative.
Yeah, we have done some work on budgeting for youth and of course and children.
That's right.
Let me begin by giving a background of what informs or what informed this decision. First of all, you see, as we have just discussed about the population results, the recently released census results, we can see that most of our people here in Uganda are young people. And secondly, there is something that is traumatizing, that we have 4 million people, those people aged between 14 to 24 years, and 43 roughly, because it is 42.6% of them, they are neither in education, no employment or any form of training. So when my colleague talked about the kicks we are seeing around, it's because of these idle young people.
The 4 million.
the 4 million people. So you can imagine this is a crisis, because for me, relating it to politics, currently we are running, I think NRM is securing your future. But I just want to bring the attention that the future of these 4 million people is not secure in any way. Yes, I think that is important for us. But also, we have suggested we need platform. But what youth need to agree on is that we may not easily be given this platform. Nobody will come to us and say, you young people, this is your platform. Now you can begin holding us accountable and so on. No. As you have said, actually, though you say the movement, whatever, but I believe that we, the youth, also Youth Council, I feel sometimes it has not done much, especially in terms of even its programs. They are not known to the youth, as he said, the programs under Youth Council. But I think the youth need now to come up and we start to write our own position papers. For example, now the budget, the National Budget Framework paper for the next financial year is out. Can we identify whether the youth have been prioritized? Which areas would the youth want to be of a priority to them? So I think you have posed something that is very, very good and very key for us as the youth. But now what we need is organization. And I believe that now we as economists, we can also play a very big role in supporting them, especially in terms of the technical support, but also creating awareness. So I don't know whether we can work with the National Youth Council and NGOs like the Youth Link and so on, so that we really try to expand the outreach of our message. Yes, and package it very well in a way that really the youth are brought at the forefront. And one thing I don't like about usually the political season is how the youth are abused. See, the youth are abused, they are taken advantage of. You see, if these people are idle, and remember they are very young, energetic, and very active, you'll find the same group of people is moving across the country. Someone is in Kawari, they are there. Someone is in West Nile, they are there. The same group. Because very few people actually may leave their offices to go for these campaigns or these whatever. So it speaks to the huge problem that we have at the country, and that we needed to really look for, have it solved. We have to look for solutions to this. And one thing that you have talked about, the youth, you have heard about the issue of under-representation of the youth. And for us to have our voices heard, we must be represented. Because as long as the representation is not adequate enough, you have seen now how the trends are changing towards women. Because the representation is becoming somehow reasonable now. So I think the youth, we need to also come up in the same spirit, and really we have a serious, maybe affirmative action to make sure that the youth are represented to a certain magnitude. Okay.
I'm glad you talked about the reality of not being handed anything on the silver platter for the youth. Many would, for example, expect, since the phrase goes around, you're tomorrow's leader, that actually somebody is going to come and say, okay, now it's your time, please come and take over so you can lead. But we haven't seen any strategic and deliberate effort that allows youth to be leaders, effective leaders within the lower settings, in order to prepare them for what comes in the next few years or so. He talks about writing position papers, position papers that could be either counter to what the government is rolling out, in order to explain exactly how or what can be improved. Do you see this as an effective driver of change if many youth were able to be given an opportunity to come up with these writings? Can they write these things? Because many times when you tell the youth to stand up and speak at events, you're taken aback and you're wondering, okay, how is it going to happen? What do we need to do to ensure that when they speak up, they give you the confidence that leadership is coming out from whatever grassroots level they are at?
Yeah, I think I cannot downplay the role of the youth or the skills they have.
No doubt.
Because one strategy I've seen is that we can offer leadership to the youth, and then we bring them together.
Mentor them.
Then where there are gaps, like position papers, some of us have been supporting them to develop them, and then create a platform for them to engage with various stakeholders.
That is right.
Maybe what they also need capacity building in terms of advocacy skills. You know, there's a trend that used to go on the civil society, thinking that to change something in government, you need to be forceful. But the other strategy that I have seen, especially under the current context of Uganda, is engaging with the institutions. For instance, when I was still with the African Leadership Institute, we used to work with Uganda Management Institute towards generating policy briefs. You get an issue of policy, do a research around it, and then disseminate it, and also work with the Cabinet Secretariat to ensure that some of those views are taken on. So if we devise the same strategy, bring youth together, you know, support them, generate these papers, create platforms, and engage with the relevant institutions, I believe there can be some change.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Werike, for that submission. Time now for a short break. When we return, we shall, of course, get back to the overarching prong for this discussion, which is the budgeting. Happy the youth voices have come out very strongly on how things can improve for them, no doubt. We shall go for a break. When we return, we shall be looking at the 10-fold growth strategy of growing the economy from $50 billion to 500 by the year 2040. Stay with us. To a staggering 500 billion by the year 2040 sounds like an overly ambitious endeavor, but is it? Maybe that's a question that Dr. Werike will be answering for us. 50 billion to 500 billion in a space of 15 years.
I think it's good to dream, but also some dreams may not be realistic.
Okay.
Reason being is that if you are projecting to move from $50 billion, $1 billion economy to 500 billion in 15 years, then you may need the growth above 7% per annum, and this means you are in control of all other factors. That may be like the weather, for instance, we depend on agriculture, the conflict, assumption that there will not be any conflict, probably the assumption that there will be no pandemic and maybe a lockdown, and so that is why when you are planning, you need to be a bit realistic. So if we look at our annual GDP growth, how big is it? I think there's a time we stagnated. Before 2019, we had above 7% growth for a long period of time. But the economy did not multiply as quickly as we expected. Because also, you have things to do with the corruption leakage from the budgets, that when you plan for something, at the end of the day, you don't achieve what you plan to do because money is stolen. The Inspectorate of Government is telling you that every year we are losing about 10 trillion in our budget. Leakage, procurement, false accounting, and so forth. So it means that you have to factor in those factors that may impact on how you are spending and what you are going to achieve from that spending. So for me, I say it's good to dream, but let also demonstrate that if we are dreaming to achieve that, then we have also put in the safeguards to ensure that what we budget for is utilized according to the plan. We see that we are promoting probably many people moving from the informal sector to the formal sector, bringing businesses together so that the productivity can increase and they can contribute to the revenue at URA and so forth. But if we don't do all this, it can remain a dream on paper. And then by 2040, we are beginning another dream, maybe probably 2080, when we have not achieved this.
Okay, that's interesting. Kenneth Asiimwe, what are the available economic activities and ventures during this election year, for example, that can offer some significant revenue, especially for people to survive. The other question is, how is the National Development Plan 4, which is out now, aligned to the budget? Have you had a chance to peruse?
Yes, maybe I will begin with the second one. If I go to the economic ventures. Now, the National Development Plan 4 will be implemented for the first time in the financial year 2025-26, the first year of its implementation. But what is bothering us is that even in the first year of implementation, the budget is not aligned to the plan. For example, according to the NDP4, in the financial 2025-26, we are supposed to have a budget of 67.8 trillion Uganda shillings. And what we are seeing at the moment, the budget is 57.4 trillion, already a shortfall of 10 trillion, meaning that that is failing at the first attempt. Secondly, for us to achieve the 10-fold growth strategy that we have talked about, that's what NDP4 intends to even achieve by 2039 and 2040, the government itself, through the National Planning Authority, came up with key priority areas that the government is fully convinced that if these areas are prioritized, they can help us to achieve that $500 billion US. And now, which areas are these? They are called ATMs. A standing for agro-industrialization. T is tourism development. Then we have mineral, this is mineral-based industry development. And then we have science, innovation, and technology, including ICT, just as an enabler. Those are the areas that we have to help us achieve full monetization of the economy. But I want to speak this to our viewers and listeners that these ATMs, all their budgets have been cut. So that is what actually informs us that it means the government is actually not serious on this. Because for us to achieve that growth, we need to do business in an unusual way. But actually for us, we are using it in even a usual way, or even not as usual, because now we are even cutting these budgets related to the current or running financial year. When you look at National Development Plan, it had proposed a total of 4.7 trillion to be invested in these ATMs alone. But I can tell you that according to the budget we have, we are short of this by 2 trillion, because now it is just 2.7 trillion. Now remember that this is the logic that we have for us to grow our economy, but then we are falling short. An example, a good example is on agro-industrialization. For me, why I have pulled out this example is because, first of all, majority of our population are still in agriculture. That is right. And if we prioritize this key program, we can cater for many people within our economy. But when you look at agro-industrialization, NDP4 proposes an investment or a budget of 2.44 trillion for the next financial year. But according to the National Budget Framework paper at the moment, only 1.6 has been allocated. So it shows that really the budget is not aligned to the National Development Plan. Even tourism development itself, it's just being given 176 billion. And we are saying this is the way to go. So what the government is putting in paper and in practice, they are so divergent from the practice. And therefore, I believe, as my colleague has said, just to reemphasize that if we remain on this trend or this way of doing things, we shall not achieve that growth of 500, GDP of $500 billion US by that year of 2039, 2040. Okay. But now, coming to the
very quickly
the economic activities that we believe that people can get involved in. Nowadays, there is
especially the youth. They do inform how these elections. You said it earlier. They are really at the forefront of the electioneering.
Yes, but you see, for me, we already have activities that the youth are involved in. So for me, what I'm looking at is how can they strategize, So how can they get mileage from these activities? For example, most of our youth, other than those who are in formal employment, that's what I'm going to emphasize because those ones are already working. Yeah. They are in, we have the youth who are in mining, we have the youth who are in these creative, some in music, and we have the youth who are in welding and tailoring, such kind of work. So they need to come up with associations that can be supported by the politicians now. They come, you tell them we have this project, this is the group of the youth, this is what we are doing, and therefore if you want to give us any kind of support, support us on this. I think that's an issue of organization. Yes. Okay,
thank you very much, Kenneth Asiimwe, economist with CSBAG, and many thanks to you too, Dr. Gerard Werike, a board member at the Africa Youth Development Link. It's been a pleasure having your perspectives on the show. That will do it for the Kickstarter. But my colleague, Stephen Mbide, is standing by in Chitezi. Now, Chitezi was just a few months ago the point of attention for the entire country. What we do know right now is that those that were affected by the landslide are asking for compensation. Government has rolled out something for them, but the bone of contention apparently is on what mode. There are those who are asking for cash so that they can go and find what to do with it. Others are opting that, well, the state or government for that matter can come up with building